Good morning and welcome to the webinar today in the series for D3's ERP system that is built on CTech. Today I'm joined by Jordan Jolly, who will be helping me today, and this is Daryl Price with D3 Technologies. As we've visited on the topics over the last couple of weeks, we're wrapping up the series today, and again we are really focusing on the master data that resides for most companies. If you do need help in some of the other areas that we've talked about over different series around design and sales automation, large data management projects, or even Fusion Lifecycle for PLM type tools, we'd be glad to help you. But today we are focused on ERP. Document management was our first session, followed by workflow collaboration. And last week, really interesting and cool, was the business intelligence tool that we have. And now, this week, we're going to be jumping into accounting. And Jordan will be sharing some of the value that happens whenever you have an integrated system versus something that's external and not connected. So with that, again, at a high level, we're looking at taking the chaos and the mistakes out of the process, giving you tools that give you information and timeliness to remove those problems. And when we look at ERP systems, when we look at the D3 ERP tool, it is a very robust system. You can kind of see with the slides here, the types of areas that we focus on that are core to manufacturing. And even if you're in something that has a lot of regulatory requirements, those are certainly areas that we can work with, even within government and ITAR scenarios. Modern day SaaS and web native. So with that, Jordan, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Let me stop sharing and you should be able to take control.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Daryl. Appreciate it. Here. All righty, everybody see my screen?
I do.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Daryl. So yeah, we'll be diving into explore a few of the areas in the accounting module in the ERP system today. But first, I would love to provide a little bit of backstory. I think that's important for this discussion. There is a somewhat of a cliche, at least something we hear all the time about ERP systems, in that an ERP system will tend to be very, very strong in either manufacturing and operations, or on the other hand, accounting. It'll be one or the other. And the reason for that, the reason behind that trope, if you will, I believe, is that most of these ERP systems have an origin story, and that's typically some manufacturing company or some distribution company or some service company somewhere had some clever IT people that wrote their own system around their specific needs as a business. And that ended up being successful. And at some point, that system broke off and forked off into its own product that could then be leveraged. And so depending on who the clever IT person is that was driving that, usually the needs would be focused based around the needs of a CFO who's trying to run their business based on the financial side, or based on an ops person, an operations person who really is getting down into the details of work orders and inventory and production and so on. And so you have that kind of path. CTech is interesting. The core platform here is an interesting case because what you're seeing here today is a rewrite, a fundamental re-architecture of one of these older ERP systems. We'll call it a legacy ERP that was also called CTech. That was focused more on the operations and manufacturing side, and through the life of that ERP, quite honestly, there weren't many people that were super happy about the accounting side. And so when we endeavored to rewrite the system, we obviously took that opportunity to say, okay, we're going to abstract this and make sure that we end up with a full suite ERP system that was good for both manufacturing and accounting. Because we weren't writing it. We were a software company true to our bones. And we were not writing it just for one industry or for one side of the company, ops or accounting, but truly to be flexible and applied to many industries and all sides of the business. So that's a little background. What we focused on is this idea of integration. That's even in the title of this webinar. Most older true ERP systems were somewhat encumbered by their technology, and they kind of break it out into all of the operational activity on one side, and then you kind of have to catch your numbers up. You do batch postings, you do like an invoice cycle at the end of the day to update the financial reports to be in line with everything that shipped and invoiced earlier that day. Or you'd have, big long month-end batch processes to catch up with and inventory and things like that. So we designed CTEC with what is called, in this industry, is called a perpetual ledger, perpetual inventory. And that's somewhat made possible by the modern technology, by the object relational database behind the scenes here. That just wasn't possible with the technology before. And that's some of what you're seeing with modern technology, kind of redefining how these things are done. And so it's interesting, most people don't even have this opportunity, but with CTEC, you actually have a GL transaction mapping that is set up ahead of time. As you'll see, this is kind of the underpinnings of the admin module here. We have all of these different types of transactions that can happen on the operational side of the business. Like what happens when you do an external invoice to an end customer shipment? What happens when we do a receipt of inventory against a purchase order? What happens when a system check is printed out from the system? And so on. You go to each one of these mappings and you say, well, when that type of transaction happens on the operational side, we need to make sure and credit or debit, that's your standard double entry bookkeeping, this particular account in my P&L or balance sheet or so on. So you'll map those transactions, and typically you do that once to hit your specific chart of accounts. And then from then on, those transactions, when a shipping clerk or receiving clerk does that transaction, the credit or debit, those postings are made in real time, perpetually. So what that means is that your financial reports, your numbers are also real time. They're constantly up to date. So when we look at a P&L, we look at a balance sheet, we look at one of these kind of very traditional financial reports, running those reports is just as simple as defining a date range and clicking update. There's no kind of catching things up or doing a batch cycle of postings to get things caught up. It's always real time. So this has kind of laid this architecture, and again, we've addressed this kind of at the fundamental design level of the platform, has sort of laid a foundation for a system that's really fundamentally a good platform for both accounting and operations and manufacturing. They're in sync. I mean, it was designed to do that adroitly to accommodate that. So I want to look at actual financial reports and kind of dive into the module here with that as background. So I actually have a profit and loss, or some will say income statement, loaded here. And this is just a typical, again, we talk a lot about CTEC and D3, we talk about innovation. It's a modern platform. We're on the cutting edge. You're staying ahead. It's got that competitive edge. We don't talk about innovative accounting in that way. Creative accounting solution is not really a thing. Accounting is fairly standard, generally accepted accounting principles. So we try not to stay too innovative on the accounting side of things. So you have your standard financial reports. You can run filters on a date range for a location, for a cost or profit center, on a period type. And I've got month to date, year to date loaded here, comparing 2018 to 2019, the percent of sales that each balance has against my company numbers. And for the most part, companies will export that to Excel and typically format and reformat these numbers based on how the bank or the financial entity needs to see the P&L. So you do your reporting, you tend to export to Excel or at least a PDF, and you have your P&L. One thing you'll see with this type of seamless integration with the financials down to operations, you'll start to see just how easy it is to run a P&L like this, up to date, to say, well, this balance here, my cost of sales materials, I want to understand that number a little better. So I'm going to drill down into it and see a summary of what types of numbers are driving that. So I've got two things impacting my cost of sales materials account. I've got material being relieved as a result of invoicing or shipping material out the door. I also have a relieved inventory log, meaning those are just like cycle count inventory adjustments happening in my demo system here. So I can drill down even further and drill down through the numbers here to say, show me the source. I want to see the general ledger details, the actual credit and debit splits that are hitting this cost of sales material account to present that summary number on my P&L. And from here, you can drill down even further. You can say, well, what was this posting here that was, hit $514 against my cost of sales material account? Well, that was the result of an invoice 153 that shipped out on October 22nd. I want to drill down into that. So I'm drilling down into the object ID, meaning the source transaction. I can see, okay, well, this was a shipment of 2 bits of product to Southwest Airlines. We charged this much, it cost this much. Looks like I lost a little bit of money there, a negative margin. Why was that? What was causing that number? I, of course, drill down even further and I can see, all right, this is what was shipped. This is what it cost. Why did it cost that much? Well, it looks like the reason it cost that much is because you had all of this material that came in, Terminal A, these part numbers, these purchase order receipts, and then I can even drill down further to get to the very source purchase order receipt to see, okay, what was going on here? Who did I buy this material from? How much did it cost? When did I get it in? September 25th. Where is it now? Do I have any remaining? What's the traceability on this? So you've got all the way down from a P&L through the work orders and shipments on the operations side that drove that, even down to the source PO receipt traceability. It's all under one umbrella. It's very, very easy. I'd say that's maybe the single most important and compelling thing about the accounting module is just how seamless it is on the integration side. Now, the other discussion I have about accounting is, okay, how do we equip your staff, your staff accountants or CFOs, whoever's in charge of actually doing these payments, processing AR, processing AP, doing reconcile and tax reporting and so on. So I do want to spend a few minutes just looking at that. Again, this is not groundbreaking or innovative necessarily by any means. This is pretty standard, generally accepted accounting practice. So I'm going to start on the sales side with accounts receivable. And I'd like to start just with an order that hasn't even shipped or invoiced yet. It's an order that is in process. We've got a work order. We're building it for this customer called Products and More. We've got a tax, and we even have terms that 50% upfront payment is required. So that we see that the prepayment has actually already been received and we just have a balance due on this. That's going to represent behind the scenes in your on your balance sheet, actually, believe it or not, is a customer liability, a customer deposit that's associated with this order. And I wanted to bring up that example because it's another great example of integration where you have potentially prepayments or even progress billings kind of sitting on a project that represent a customer liability that at the time of shipment is going to net down AR. We're going to do those things kind of elegantly, but behind the scenes so that you don't have to. So I've got a down payment here. I've got potentially items that I'm ready to ship, and it's going to relieve all this inventory. This is another great example of the integration to accounting. Shipping this product is actually going to clear the liability, net down AR automatically. It's also going to drive cost of goods sold for each of these parts that I've picked from this bin. It's going to look at labor that has been logged. It's going to write to cost of goods sold labor and overhead, potentially even any outsource charges. So you'll have all those COGS entries there. It's also going to drive a revenue entry for recognizing that revenue on your ledger, and your P&L will be updated immediately after doing this. So you click create invoice, all of those things happen kind of behind the scenes. So I've got a demo order up here ready to go. Got an invoice being created. And this, of course, tees up accounting as well. So this is the copy of the invoice that the customer will get. Obviously, that still remains to be done. You have to send the customer the invoice. And you have two options there. An invoice will look something like this. You can kind of customize it to the view of how you'd like your customer to see these invoices. It even shows what's already been paid. There's that prepayment amount. You can have this sent out overnight. So you can have a customer set up with invoices just going out through an overnight batch process. So you don't actually have to send them manually. Or you can, of course, email the PDF directly from your system. to the customer, and accounting can run a list of invoices that have been sent or not yet sent over a date range. That'll be in the invoice list. And I did want to show you the general ledger, those transactions, those entries that are made in real time. There's your cost of goods sold, materials, AR, revenue, inventory relief, and so on. Again, these numbers are automatically updating that P&L, that balance sheet in real time. Now, it comes time to actually receive payment. Maybe you send your customer a statement that says this is, these are the buckets of aging of things that we are still owed, credits open, and so on. What it comes down to is actually getting payment. So I'm gonna take payment, open a payment collection process for this customer. There's their statement. It's going to be a part of this deposit I'm gonna take to the bank. And of course, we have all of the open invoices, what they have previously paid, what is still owed. What's really nice is you'll see that prepayment that I had on the order. That hasn't created additional redundant accounts receivable to be paid from the customer. It cleared that liability for me and kind of netted that down. And I can choose, say I'd like to pay this invoice and this invoice. That's going to be smartly tallying that up here. And let's just imagine they wrote a check for us for precisely that amount. And we'll get the green light and we can proceed with the payment. That will, again, create a real-time ledger entry to net down that AR and give us cash on our balance sheet. It'll roll into a deposit as with any other checks that you're collecting. And of course, you can take your deposit to the bank. Other people have different payment methods. You can have wire transfers or even ACH. We also do credit card integration. There's a third-party connection called Card Connect where you can actually charge customer credit cards in real time, and we even have credit card transaction reconcile, and it's really, really great. That's kind of a typical high-level overview of an AR payment collections process. I want to do the same thing on the AP side. So really moving over from, we were in sales where we started before, I want to move over to purchasing. So purchasing, I've loaded a purchase order here, and really where I want to start, just to emphasize the accounting integration, is what happens when you have a purchase order you're waiting on and it actually arrives in your warehouse. Your receiving person at the warehouse will have this screen open called Receive Parts. They'll look up the PO number on the packing slip, and they'll find, okay, this is what I'm receiving. It's a $2 PO receipt, and I'm going to click Receive. Of course, there are other things that a receiving person would do here, like incoming inspections and so on. What I want to focus on is the accounting side. So I have this purchase order receipt. Right when they clicked that Receive button, when the warehouse receiving clerk says it's here, receive, that creates a general ledger entry, again, in real time. Typically, this will be mapped to an inventory account like finished goods or raw materials or whatever product account you have for inventory. But also here, we've got an accrued liability. So what we've done is we've increased our inventory amount on our balance sheet to say the goods have arrived. And then we've decreased or credit an accrued liability account to say this is items that we've been received, but we have not been invoiced for yet for the vendors. So you'll have that accrual sitting there. You can have nice reports of, show me all the receipts that have come in, but I haven't been billed for yet. And CTEC kind of puts that on a plate for you. Now that accrual is going to be there until I actually dive into the AP process and we say, all right, we have now been billed for this item. So what's going to happen is I'm going to type in that PO number that we had here, which you saw was PO number 136. So the vendor will reference that, 136. I'll add that receipt. Click submit. And at that point, I've entered the invoice from the vendor master distributor here. And again, real-time GL integration. I've cleared that accrual. So that is netted down to 0. It's no longer on my balance sheet there, but now I have credited my accounts payable. So that's going to be on my financial reports. I have an accounts payable credit of $2 there. That's also going to be on your vendor statement, where we now have aging until I pay it. So as we get into the AP payment process. So we could create a payment for master distributor. And it will show any and all credits. We call them debit memos. It's on the vendor side. And there is my voucher for actually, this is an older voucher, believe it or not. The reason why is workflow. So if you guys are familiar with the term three-way match, this auto-approve notes will register if you have a match between your vendor invoice, package slip, and PO. And especially with larger companies, you'll have AP clerks that require workflow movement to say, I've entered the invoice, but I need it approved for payment. And so they'll go through workflow and say, I'm submitting this for approval, and more of a director or CFO type will actually approve things for payment. Once those are approved for payment, they will show down here in the voucher list as to what dollar amount, not just has been requested, but what's been approved. Say, okay, from the payment, I'm approving this voucher for payment, $20. I'd like to write a system check, or again, other payment types could be ACH, or a manual paper check, or a wire transfer, or so on. You can have as many payment types as you like. So say system check, and I'm going to mark this as paid, and that will generate a check in the system for you. It says paid with system check. That will write to a check register where you can do batch, check runs and things like that. And it actually formats the check with the bank account routing number and everything for you. And all you have to do is click that PDF to print out the check or to print them out in batch. And of course, again, as always, we have these real-time ledger entries being created to say, hey, look, we cleared our accounts payable and we paid it out of our cash account. So we have a credit to our cash account there. There are loads of other features that you could kind of dive into here. I kind of took you through the manual one-off payment. We also have things like batch voucher payments where you can say, look, I'm going to skip the approvals process and I just want to create a bunch of payments and a bunch of checks all at once. You can do that. It's a great tool. You can do tax reporting. So if you see reports here, we'll give you tax reports based on your tax authorities and tax structures and breakouts. We've got recurring entries, so you can make manual journal postings, journal entries, and then you can set them to recurring. So for instance, let's say you had a monthly bill, utility payment, it's going to be the same every month. Just go ahead and clone that and do that every month. We've got a tool called backdated ledger entries. So this is fully auditable. So let's just imagine that you had one of those invoices that we created. Say somebody would, I don't know, for some reason they had to change it. Well, that's going to write to ledger history where you've got change history here. So you'll have a log of anything and everything that has possibly changed. It's a wonderful audit trail. Speaking of audit, you've got all these great reconcile tools where you can say, all right, show me my daily ledger versus inventory activity. Let me validate my AR. Let me reconcile the ledger and so on. If you've got multiple currencies moving, there's some great foreign currency reconcile processes. And again, for lack of time, you could kind of jump into some of the really wonderful features in the CTEC accounting module. But hopefully this gives you kind of a full rounded out view of just how powerful the accounting system is, specifically with respect to how tightly, how seamlessly integrated it is to the rest of the ERP, what's actually running your business, the operations, the inventory, the order bookings, the prepayments, and so on and so forth. So that will conclude my presentation here. I'll stop my screen share, and I really appreciate the time, everybody.
Thank you, Jordan, for sharing. And I just want to kind of, something that was said to me in the past from president of a company, having the ability to have visibility on cash flow and things like that are immediate in the moment when you're trying to make purchase and decisions that impact that cash flow is very key and vital. And so it speaks very heavily to having that integrated solution so you can see that at any time. So very, very cool stuff. Thank you all for joining us. We will be getting out recordings of all 4 of the sessions, and you should see that coming out soon. And thanks again for joining us today.